You are sitting at your desk or perhaps grabbing a coffee when a colleague or a friend leans in with that specific, expectant look in their eyes. They ask what your plans are for the big day coming up next week, and you feel a strange, familiar tightening in your chest because you genuinely have nothing planned. When you tell them it is just another Tuesday, the air in the room seems to shift immediately. They give you a look that is half pity and half confusion, as if you just admitted to a crime or a deep, tragic secret. This reaction creates a subtle friction between your internal reality and the script society expects you to follow. You aren't trying to be difficult, and you aren't trying to be a martyr for some edgelord cause. You simply do not feel the spark that everyone else seems to be chasing so desperately. Most of the time, we are told that a lack of excitement for our own birthday is a sign of depression or a lack of self-love. We see the endless stream of carefully curated parties and birthday month celebrations online, and it is easy to feel like our own internal quiet is a defect. But the truth is far more grounded in how our individual brains process expectations, rewards, and the passage of time. Psychology suggests that your indifference isn't a hole in your personality, but rather a specific adaptation to your environment. For some of us, the brain has simply decided that the cost of the celebration outweighs the benefit of the event itself. We are going to look at why your mind might be opting out of the party and what that actually says about your emotional health. To understand why some of us shrug at the calendar, we have to look back at how our brains learn to handle disappointment. In the late 60s, a psychologist named Martin Seligman identified a concept called learned helplessness, which explains what happens when a brain realizes that its efforts don't change the outcome of a situation. If you grew up in an environment where your milestones were often overlooked or where your specific needs were sidelined, your brain performed a very clever survival trick. It stopped caring as a way to stop hurting. It is a form of emotional economy where the mind refuses to invest hope in a day that has historically yielded a low return. This isn't just a feeling, because it actually shows up in our neurochemistry through something called the reward prediction error. Our brains release dopamine based on the difference between what we expect to happen and what actually happens. If you expect a huge, wonderful day and it turns out to be just okay, your dopamine levels don't just stay flat, they actually crash. This crash feels like a physical weight, a sense of "is this it?" that can ruin your entire week. After a few years of this cycle, your brain decides that the safest emotional bet is to expect absolutely nothing. By setting the bar at 0, you are effectively protecting yourself from the pain of that dopamine drop. There is another group of people who don't ignore their birthdays out of pain, but because their internal clock simply operates on a different frequency. You might find that you often lose track of what day of the week it is, not because you are disorganized, but because your mind is deeply embedded in a project or a long-term goal. Psychologists often refer to this as a form of temporal blindness or high-task orientation. When your brain is wired to find satisfaction in the doing rather than the being noticed, specific dates on a calendar start to feel like arbitrary interruptions. You aren't trying to be cold or ungrateful to those who want to celebrate you. Your mental energy is simply allocated to things that feel more tangible than a number changing on a piece of paper. In a world that demands we be constantly present and performative, having a brain that prioritizes long-term objectives over short-term milestones can feel like a social handicap. However, this is often the mark of someone with a very high level of internal drive. You don't need the external world to pause and clap for you because you are already getting your validation from the work you are producing or the ideas you are exploring. The birthday becomes a non-event because it doesn't provide any new data or progress toward what you actually care about. It is like being interrupted in the middle of a great book to be told that the clock just struck noon. You acknowledge it, but you really just want to get back to the story. If you have ever felt that strange guilt for not being as excited as people think you should be, you are certainly not alone in that quiet space. It is actually quite common for high-functioning, observant people to feel a bit of birthday friction as they navigate these social expectations. If you are finding this perspective helpful for your own peace of mind, consider subscribing to the channel. We try to explore these small, everyday psychological knots to help make life feel a little less like a performance and a bit more like a personal journey. Maybe take a second to think about the last time you felt truly pressured to act happy for the sake of others and share that moment in the comments. Hearing how others handle that social noise can be incredibly grounding for everyone else in the community. The third group of people who ignore their birthdays might be the most misunderstood of all. These are the individuals who have reached a level of what psychologists Edward Desai and Richard Ryan call self-determination. Their theory suggests that the most resilient form of well-being comes from within, rather than from external accolades or specific events. If you're someone who feels whole on a random Thursday afternoon, you don't actually need a designated day to remind you that you matter. You have essentially opted out of what is known as the hedonic treadmill. This is the human tendency to constantly chase the next peak of happiness, only to return to baseline of wanting more. When you stop needing the cake, the candles, and the 30-second rendition of a song that makes everyone feel awkward, you are actually demonstrating a very high level of emotional maturity. Society often views this as being boring or no fun, but in reality, it is a form of psychological freedom. You have decoupled your self-worth from the social calendar. You don't need a crowd to validate your existence because you have already done that work yourself in the quiet moments of your life. This can be deeply threatening to people who rely on these external rituals to feel okay. Your lack of a celebration highlights the fact that maybe, just maybe, all the noise they are making is an attempt to fill a silence they are afraid of. Even if you feel like you have moved past the need for birthdays, your body might still remember things that your conscious mind has tried to file away. There is a phenomenon known as the anniversary effect, where the brain stores emotional data tied to specific times of the year. You might find yourself feeling slightly more irritable, tired, or anxious as your birthday approaches without even realizing why. This isn't because you are secretly sad about getting older, but because your nervous system is replaying the sensory environment of past experiences. It is a biological echo of every year you felt misunderstood or every year you felt the pressure to be something you weren't. Understanding this can change the way you treat yourself during that week. Instead of fighting the feeling or trying to force yourself to be festive, you can simply acknowledge that your brain is doing a routine maintenance check of its history. You can tell yourself that it makes sense to feel a bit off when the world is demanding a performance you didn't sign up for. When you stop resisting the indifference actually becomes much easier to carry. It stops being a problem to solve and starts being a boundary you have set for your own mental energy. We have been sold a version of self-love that is loud, expensive, and documented for others to see. We are told that if we don't celebrate ourselves with a flourish, we must be suffering from low self-esteem or some hidden trauma. But perhaps the most profound form of self-care is simply allowing yourself to be quiet. It is the act of looking at a day that everyone says should be special and deciding that being at peace is better than being happy by someone else's definition. There's a quiet dignity in not needing to be the center of attention. If your birthday feels like just another day, it might mean you have finally reached a point where you don't need a permission slip from the calendar to feel valid. You are allowed to let the day pass with a simple meal, a good night's sleep, or absolutely nothing at all. The people who truly understand you won't see this as a sign of misery. They will see it as a sign of a person who is comfortable enough in their own skin that they don't need a costume or a party to prove they exist. Your life is not a series of peaks and valleys marked by candles. It is a steady, ongoing conversation with yourself that doesn't need to pause just because the Earth completed another lap around a star. Sometimes, the hardest part about not caring about your birthday isn't how you feel, but how it makes other people feel about themselves. When you decline a celebration, you are inadvertently holding up a mirror to the people around you. It forces them to wonder why they are so invested in these rituals, and whether they are doing it for joy or out of a sense of obligation. This is why people often react with such intensity when you tell them you aren't doing anything. They aren't actually upset with you. They are uncomfortable with the idea that the rules of how to be a person are actually optional. You can navigate these social waters with a bit of grace by realizing that their reaction is about their own relationship with expectation. You don't have to defend your choice or explain the neuroscience of reward prediction errors to them. You can simply hold your space with a warm, steady smile. When you are genuinely okay with your own silence, other people's noise starts to lose its power over you. You realize that your indifference is actually a form of deep, internal stability that many people spend their whole lives trying to find. So, as your next birthday approaches, I want you to pay attention to that first instinctive feeling you have when you wake up. Is it a sense of dread, or is it a simple, neutral awareness that you are still here? If it is the latter, embrace it. There is nothing more grounded than a mind that is at peace with the mundane. You aren't broken, and you aren't missing out on some magical essence of life. You have simply graduated from the need for external fanfare. Maybe the best way to honor your existence is to give yourself the gift of zero pressure. Turn off the notifications, skip the performative social media post, and just exist in the quiet reality of your own being. That is where the real work of living happens anyway. It doesn't happen in the flashes of a camera or the singing of a crowd. It happens in the way you treat yourself on a random Tuesday when nobody is watching. And if you can find peace there, you have already won a game that most people don't even know they are playing. The quiet confidence of not needing to be seen is actually very similar to the way we handle our public image in other parts of our lives. The video on your screen right now explains exactly why this happens, specifically focusing on the internal mechanics of why some of us choose to stay out of the frame entirely. Click the video on your screen right now to understand the psychology behind why you might be avoiding the spotlight in more ways than one.